Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2020 Kansas Senate election. So we're actually going to be talking about this race, but we're not going to go too in depth. We're not going to worry about the Republican or Democratic primaries too much, mainly talking about Kris Kobach's candidacy for Senate in this state. So the last time Kansas went blue in a Senate race was in the 1930s. So that means it's almost been 100 years since a Democrat has been elected in Kansas. So if we're looking at who the number one GOP official is for the Kansas Senate race, we have Kris Kobach. If you recognize his name, it's because he ran in 2018 for governor in Kansas and lost to Laura Kelley. I think that was one of the more surprising things of the evening, that a Democrat carried the governor's race in Kansas. And it was a 48-44 margin of victory. The Libertarian candidate definitely got a lot of those Republican voters that may not have been too happy with Kris Kobach, and Laura Kelley definitely got a lot of them, but now he's running for Senate. And this is something that Republicans have actually been trying to avoid for just a very long time now. Kris Kobach seems to be polling the worst out of any Republican candidate, but to be fair, all of them generally perform around the same. He is the only one who loses, but Roger Marshall, the other GOP nominee possibility, other than Bob Hamilton, but we'll get to him in just a moment, he only leads Barbara Boyer by 1 percentage point. So the race will probably be close. I know a lot of people don't expect that because it's Kansas, but it definitely has shown some signs that it could possibly be competitive in the Senate race, regardless of who the GOP nominee is going to be. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because I saw this interesting political headline that I couldn't even believe. The Democratic Party is spending money in this race to boost Kris Kobach's candidacy for the Republican primary. In fact, the GOP took out, I believe, let's go ahead and see this. They took out millions of dollars, $1.2 million in TV ads to boost Marshall between now and the primary. This is a super PAC aligned with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. This comes as a response to the $3 million spent from a super PAC linked to Democrats going to push Kris Kobach as the nominee and damaging Roger Marshall. Let's talk about when we remember this. This happened back in 2012 with Claire McCaskill's Senate seat. She was able to single-handedly pick her Republican opponent and ended up beating him in the general election. I think Democrats know Kris Kobach is probably the most competitive man to run against, but Roger Marshall seems to be still in a competitive nature. I understand that Republicans may think Kris Kobach could be the end-all be-all if he's defeated in the primary, but this race probably will be closer than we might expect. It probably could be as close as Kentucky, or even have a very real possibility of going to the Democrats if Kris Kobach is the nominee. If we're looking at the overall Senate majority, the Republicans currently have a 3-seat majority, 53-47. The difference is 6, but if we're looking past 50, it's 3 seats. And if we're looking at states that are competitive this time around, let's talk about them. Colorado, Arizona, Alabama, which takes one away from the Democratic Party, but we also have 2 Senate seats up in Georgia that are close, a Senate seat in North Carolina that's close, 1 in Maine, 1 in Iowa, now 1 in Kansas, and 1 in Montana. So if we look at the races that are, competitive, Michigan, I guess you could say, is competitive. I honestly don't think Michigan or Colorado will be competitive, even though Colorado has a Republican incumbent, that is Senator Cory Gardner. If we're looking at the races that are competitive, most of these are, Republican-held seats. States like, I actually think out of all the seats on your screen, none of them are Democratic-held except for Alabama. So with these 9 toss-up seats, this puts the GOP in a very unfortunate position. One less Senate seat to worry about is definitely something that Mitch McConnell wants to hear. He does not want to have to worry about not only his own race, but numerous other races, talking about, going all over the country, having to run ads in Montana, a solid Republican state on the presidential level, and in Kansas, a solid Republican state on the presidential level, and Alabama, a solid Republican state on the presidential level, and in Kentucky, and in Mississippi and South Carolina, because Jamie Harrison is crawling up in South Carolina, and, there could be a competitive race in Mississippi. This map probably will be expanded further than these 9 toss-up Senate seats, and Kansas, adding on to the Republicans, will just make it more difficult. Because the problem is, Donald Trump trounced Hillary Clinton in Kansas. That is a solid GOP state. That's why it was so surprising that the Republicans were losing that governor race on election night and ended up losing it to Laura Kelley. And Kris Kobach was probably one of the worst picks for the nominees there, and you'd think that some of the Republican Party voters recognize that, but a lot of the Trump supporters do back Kris Kobach. He was able to, despite under fundraising both other possible Republican nominees, he seems to be performing the best out of all of them and holding on to a very solid base. He could win by a plurality in a three-way race. That is a very real possibility, but the Republican Party seems to be doing everything they can to go ahead and push him down, per se. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this article talks about. Politico. Essentially, they were talking about Mitch McConnell's entering into the race, essentially, and how Kris Kobach is attacking Mitch McConnell, saying that he wants a yes man in the Senate under Roger Marshall. Looking at just all of the things that are happening, the Democrats are supporting Kris Kobach, and you wouldn't think that they would spend $3 million on an outside Senate race that not even their primary. I mean, are you kidding? It just seems very crazy that it's just very, very interesting. So they were not have to reveal its source of funding until after the August 4th primary. So it looks like the Democratic Party is pretty much covered on this one. Bob Hamilton is the other candidate in this Senate race. It's pretty much a three-way race at this point. I know there was another notable guy who entered into the race, but he's polling around 7% in the state. More than $2 million worth of TV ads. Most of them focus on his message of being an outsider. Marshall has half of what Hamilton has, so $1 million, but is still nearly 6 times what the cash poor Kris Kobach has spent. So Marshall seems to be doing better than Kobach, despite Kobach leading. Hamilton seems to be self-funding and doing better than both of them. Looking at all the numbers that we see, I think that Kris Kobach could very well be in a competitive primary. But the fact that he's consistently leading in all of the data that we see from Kansas makes it very difficult for the Republican Party at this point, because once Kansas goes to the toss-up column, after August 4th, if Kris Kobach is the nominee and that absolutely goes gray, it's going to be very difficult for the GOP to recover from that point, because not only are they defending 8 other seats, you have to add on this individual seat as well. And it's going to be very difficult for this general election, because the millions that could have been spent in Iowa or Arizona, which Kris Kobach makes a play to say, he says that the Republican Party should not be spending money on the primary and not involving themselves in the primary for Kansas Republican voters, but focusing on states such as Arizona and Colorado and Iowa, where there's competitive, GOP incumbents, which is an honest argument, but I know Kris Kobach knows that if the GOP continues to intervene, he will probably lose the primary. But this Senate race really could very well draw the control. I know it's just one Senate race, and I know it's Kansas, and I know 6 months ago, if you told me Kansas was going to be a close race in the United States Senate and a GOP nominee was losing to the Democratic likely nominee, I would think you were crazy. I mean, it's Kansas. Why would it have been this close? Why would Kris Kobach be in a position where he could actually lose? And I understand, yes, he lost in 2018. I still think with Donald Trump on the ballot, Kris Kobach will narrowly edge out a victory here. But if the Democrats continue to maintain their nationwide lead, not only here, but in the generic ballot, it could spell out bad news on election day if Donald Trump doesn't have, that many coattails to ride, I guess you could say. There really is. If Donald Trump isn't winning here like he did in 2016, and we see anything similar to what we saw in 2018, well, Kris Kobach could be in a lot of trouble. So while the GOP does do mildly well in some other states, they are currently leading in Alabama. They're currently leading in both Georgia elections. They're pretty much underwater in the remaining 6, including Kansas at this point. They're right now underwater in Montana, in Iowa, in North Carolina, in Kansas, in Arizona, in Maine. So adding on Kansas to the GOP column, yes, puts them closer to retaining the Senate majority, but they have a lot more trouble than just one individual Senate race with one GOP nominee that they could possibly lose. Obviously, the GOP is going to try to do damage control, but I will say that they definitely have a lot more to focus on than just one individual race in the middle of the country. Literally, almost actually, I think, right around the middle of the country. So I think Kris Kobach probably will see. I'm going to actually go ahead and try to cover this before we get to the August 4th primary. Obviously, I really want to see these results. I'm not going to live stream it or anything, but I do intend to closely watch what happens that evening. This very well could make another Senate race in play for the Democratic Party, and obviously that would be something beneficial to them. Pretty much this entire article talks about who's endorsed who. In fact, Pat Roberts, the person who currently holds the Senate seat, he said throughout the entire campaign season, I will not endorse someone in the Republican primary. I will let Republicans decide that. It seems that he's being pushed by the state GOP. In fact, the state GOP chair has personally come out against Kris Kobach and his possibility of becoming the next United States Senator, or even Republican nominee for Senate. And obviously, if he wins in the general election, I don't think there will be any more discussion about him possibly being replaced as the eventual nominee 6 years later. Once you're usually in a Senate seat, people start to get used to you, and it's very rare that a Senate, an incumbent senator is primaried. But we also do need to take a look at that September 1st primary in Massachusetts. So looking at Kansas, all eyes on Kansas for whatever reason on August 4th. Again, this is very surprising to me. At least it would have been a couple of months ago, but now I'm starting to understand why some of these GOP seats that are in solid states have started to become more competitive, because we're starting to see narrowing up in South Carolina, in Mississippi, in Kentucky, and Alaska, which obviously would not, expands the overall battleground map for the United States Senate, putting the Republicans even more at risk at possibly losing the United States Senate. So that's pretty much a recap of this entire video. I'm going to make another video about this soon, like I said, but I probably won't touch this topic for maybe a week or so. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. On your screen, there should be a video that you can go ahead and watch if you want to, and then a playlist for my 2020 Senate election videos. You can watch any of those if you'd like. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.